Are you happy? Like, truly happy? Have you ever felt happy? Will you ever be happy? Even if you were at some point happy, would you even be able to tell? For something that many people would consider their entire reason to live, to have kids, to drink, to save up for retirement, to get married, happiness sure is ill-defined and fleeting. Is it really all that good of a thing to pursue? Something so evidently temporary? Although the attempt to define happiness is, in itself, an arduous philosophical task, this will be reserved for a later time. I trust that many of you at least have some sort of subjective sense of feeling happy. In this assumption, I present to you an equal parts psychological and philosophical summary of how one should pursue happiness. In the happiness hypothesis, the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt blends psychology with philosophy in order to better understand this pursuit. To begin, he brings forth an important concept. We live our lives largely as divided selves, whether it be in the mind versus the body, the brain's left versus right modules, or famously, the archaic and primitive emotional side to our contemporary rational side. We operate in conflict with the opposing components of our very being. To summarize them, Haidt provides us with the image of the elephant and the rider. The elephant, far more powerful and seemingly unreasonable, nonetheless tries to get us to where we need to be. The rider, on the other hand, is mostly powerless. Nonetheless, their intelligence can train the elephant to get us to where we need to be, far more quickly and with far fewer messes. We must identify ourselves as equally the elephant and the rider. But first, Haidt argues, we'll need to train the elephant to be less of a pessimist. One of the greatest enemies of daily happiness is that of our very own thoughts, pestering us with worries, doubts, and insecurities. This, to a degree, can be blamed on our evolutionarily useful negativity bias. The elephant, in general, will pay greater attention to the bad than the good, and this is usually a good thing. We wouldn't survive very long if we only prioritized our attention towards the stuff we find pleasurable. This is largely thanks to our red alert amygdala alarm system, which gets VIP access to any potential threats in our environment. The amygdala not only reacts to events, it also changes your thinking. A flash of anger towards someone raises a filter through which you see everything the offending person says or does as a further insult or transgression. Feelings of sadness blind you to all pleasure and opportunities, writes Haidt. Haidt suggests 3 approaches to dealing with the natural pessimism of the elephant. For one, we can try meditation. Sit down, count your breaths. Simple and yet extremely difficult. Meditation has been shown to lower blood pressure, anxiety, and may have a role in neuroplasticity. Importantly, meditation allows us to see our thoughts as passing entities rather than fundamental parts of ourselves, relieving us of our fears and anxieties with consistent practice. Secondly, there is cognitive behavioral therapy, which borrows from Buddhism and Stoicism. In 1960, the psychiatrist Aaron Beck mapped out the common negative biases that were evident in depressed patients. He found the cognitive triad of depression. I'm no good, my world is bleak, and my future is hopeless. Beck identified various ways to classify these automatic thoughts, such as magnification, where one bad thing signifies an upcoming tragedy, or personalization, where the blame is largely put on oneself. Cognitive therapy trains one to use a set of tools to politely challenge and reframe the ruminating thoughts of the elephant. Every session, the patient is given small tasks, such as taking a walk rather than staying in bed, that provide a sense of relief and pleasure to one's mind, training the elephant to better handle its far more pessimistic outlook. Finally, Haidt suggests the use of SSRIs for those who have struck out on the cortical lottery. Yes, some people simply have brains that are frustratingly negative, and sometimes a pill is just far easier than years of therapy. It has even been shown to be as effective as therapy. Haidt notes that this method is controversial for 2 reasons. For one, it's seen as a shortcut. Some people genuinely believe in the notion of no pain, no gain, and in this sense, SSRIs are nothing more than cheating in the grand scheme of our pursuit of happiness. Secondly, SSRIs can change one's personality, giving someone who is already well-adjusted a sudden sense of flourishing and self-confidence. On this note, Haidt asks us, does that sound like progress or Pandora's box? Before you answer that, answer this. Which of these phrases rings truest to you? Be all that you can be, or, this above all, to thine own self be true. Our culture endorses both, relentless self-improvement as well as authenticity, but we often escape the contradiction by framing self-improvement as authenticity. We feel that gradual progress is authentic. Put this way, Haidt questions the logic in denouncing the use of antidepressants. as being inherently opposed to our true selves. Hopefully now we have a less pessimistic outlook. However, the absence of negative thoughts doesn't necessarily suggest that we are happy yet. Or does it? Stoicism and Buddhism, especially in the contemporary setting, offer a chance to be happy through a breaking from external attachments and accepting things as they are. Happiness comes from within. Stoicism, specifically, proposes that happiness is ataraxia, a state of serene calmness, far from our notion of happiness as that of pleasure and perhaps excitement. Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go well, wrote Epictetus, proposing that an acceptance of circumstance is a path to living well. Haidt suggests that Stoicism and Buddhism may have taken things a little too far. Happiness can come from outside yourself as long as you know where to look. This is especially evident in the progress principle. The elephant, argues Haidt, feels pleasure not only when it achieves a certain goal or attains a certain object, but even more so whenever it takes a step in the right direction. Psychologist Richard Davidson has identified two types of positive effect: pre-goal attainment, the pleasure before you achieve a goal, and post-goal attainment, the pleasure after it's achieved. Interestingly, the latter is very short-lived, whereas the former is far more sustainable and constant. This is summed up by Shakespeare. Things won are done, joy's soul lies in the doing. The progress principle is aided in part by the adaptation principle, sometimes called the hedonic treadmill. Simply put, we have a default range or probability distribution of happiness, some lower and some higher, that we will always return to. Hence, we constantly set new targets once the novelty and enjoyment of attaining one's goal has worn off. This is even evident at the neurological level, where nerve cells will respond more strongly to a new stimuli, but will then habituate to it after a certain amount of time. The hedonic treadmill was well recognized by the Stoics, Buddha, and many others who suggested that trying to change one's circumstances was futile, and instead we should accept things and realize that we will never be satisfied if we keep hoping and striving for something better. Even more, the Stoics suggested that we should only ever try to control that which we can, which is usually internal things like our thoughts. External conditions, instead, should be accepted as they are. This actually coincided with another big finding in happiness research, that our genes largely affect our happiness and our environment does not appear to have much of an impact on how happy we are. For example, people who live in colder regions tend to expect those who live in hotter climates to be happier, but this is unfounded. Same goes for those who believe that attractive people are happier than unattractive people. Even with wealth and material goods, happiness only appears to improve when one can provide for their basic needs, but doesn't significantly increase after around a $75,000 annual income. However, some conditions have been shown to impact our happiness, contrary to Stoic advice. Firstly, there's noise. Even when people adapt to noisy environments, they still show cognitive deficits and reduced happiness. Secondly, there's commuting. Studies have shown that even after years of commuting, people will have high levels of stress hormones. Thirdly, environments that give people little choice, such as studying at school or working a job that gives little autonomy, can also greatly reduce our happiness. Fourthly, shame, such as one's insecurities, can greatly decrease subjective well-being. And finally, relationships, the most important of all, can truly make or break one's happiness. The more and better off your relationships, the happier you will likely be. Taken together, the happiness formula, devised by various positive psychology researchers, is this, where S is our biological happiness set point that could be adjusted through meditation, therapy, and drugs. C is the external conditions that do in fact alter our level of happiness, such as commuting and relationships. And finally, V for voluntary activities. If we've reduced our negativity bias to improve our conditions, are we happy yet? Not quite, as Haidt quotes Bronte's advice. It is vain to say that human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquility. They must have actions, and they will make it if they cannot find it. Voluntary activities are the very action that is spoken of, worthwhile pursuits that allow us to enjoy the progress principle, the enjoyment of an activity for the sake of the activity itself. This is best summarized in the psychological idea of flow, the state of total immersion in a task that is challenging and yet closely matches one's abilities. This can occur through sports, good conversation, creative pursuits, or pretty much anything someone finds full engagement of attention in, while requiring a certain skill. Activities that provide us with a sense of flow go beyond pleasure, although they can provide that too. Instead, they give us gratification, whereas pleasures are delights that have clear sensory and strong emotional components, Gratifications give us a long-lasting benefit that results from accomplishing and improving on something. For example, pleasure arrives from eating ice cream, but eating too much can quickly deaden the experience. Gratification, on the other hand, only further increases as one gets better and better at whatever they are mastering. As of now, we can develop a simple blueprint for being happy. For one, we need to understand that we are both the elephant and the rider. Secondly, we need to retrain the elephant to be less of a pessimist. Through meditation, cognitive therapy, and if one's happiness set point is a little low, SSRIs. Thirdly, we should change some external conditions, such as lowering environmental noise, commuting less, getting involved in institutions that provide more choice, and making progress towards reducing our shame. Finally, we need to explore and participate in activities that provide us with a sense of flow, whether that be painting, skateboarding, or gardening. This, of course, isn't all there is to achieving happiness. This is, in fact, only the first step. Happiness also involves love, virtue, and meaning, something that will be discussed in a future video.